noise coming from that creature.
So welcome everyone to I think this is the 7th episode of the Bizarre Base broadcast. Tonight I'm sitting down here with Scott Mardis. How are you doing tonight, Scott?
I'm good. How are you, Nate?
I'm doing great. It's actually pretty hot where I am. Even in Maine, it gets, you wouldn't think it gets this hot even in the summertime.
Probably the humidity, I would imagine.
Yeah.
I was in Vermont for many years, and I know the humidity could get really bad there, too. So.
Yeah. Well, it definitely seems to be the case.
Well, I'm sitting here in South Florida, and it's hot, too. So.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So to start off, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got into the field?
Sure. Well, as probably many of your audience know, I've been a field researcher at Lake Champlain for the last 27 years.
Mm-hmm.
I actually lived in Vermont for 18 years. I've been living in Florida for the last 8 years, but I still go back every summer for like a month or 6 weeks to do my field research at Lake Champlain. I'm originally a native of Alabama, from North Alabama, in the northeast corner, about 2-hour drive south from the Tennessee border, and about 3 hours west of Atlanta, Georgia.
Oh, yeah.
So I spent the first 21 years of my life there, and then wound up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania for 5 years. A friend of mine bought a house as a real estate investment in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to move up and rent the house from him, and I got a job at a Tower Records there in Philly. I worked there for quite a few years, and I also had a rock and roll band.
Right.
Trying to make a career as a musician, and I tried that for several years in Alabama too.
Mm-hmm.
Played a few clubs, but I never really was able to get a record contract or anything like that. So finally, after years and years, you can go back to the 1970s when I was a child, and I had an interest in paleontology and the Loch Ness Monster, but I never really pursued it,
Mm-hmm.
But I remember when the famous underwater photographs were taken back in the 1970s and all that, when it was in the news.
Yep.
And I saw Jaws when it first came out when I was 11 years old, and that really had a profound impact on me about sea monsters.
Yeah, I can imagine.
All this stuff was going on in the back of my mind, even while I was pursuing a music career. So finally, after years and years of frustration with the music thing, I started revisiting the cryptozoology thing.
Mm.
The next thing I know, I'm much more interested in doing the cryptozoology thing than I am in playing the music,
Right.
So I'm sitting around and I'm thinking, well, maybe I can save up some money and move to Scotland and hunt for Nessie.
Oh, yeah.
And then you start thinking about all that, about, migrating to a whole different continent, country, and all the, the visas and all that.
Mm-hmm.
You start thinking about it. I don't know about this,
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm at the Free Library of Philadelphia, and at the same time during this time period, I was doing volunteer work in the vertebrate paleontology department of the Philadelphia Academy of Natural Sciences, cataloging Ice Age fossils. And because I was working there, I also had access to the library that they had there of scientific papers, and I also had access to the fossils that they keep in the back that aren't on display.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I was able to actually hold a real plesiosaur skull in my hands.
Right, yeah,
when I was working there,
pretty
so,
incredible.
I didn't get paid anything, but my God, what I got paid in and knowledge.
Yeah.
And information is just invaluable.
That's
So
incredible.
it was definitely worth it. I did this for about, 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I'm at the Free Library of Philadelphia, which is not the Academy Library, but the regular Philadelphia Library, looking for books for the Loch Ness Monster. And I blunder up on Joe Zarzinski's book on Champ with the Mansi photograph in it, which I had seen the Mansi photograph before, but I didn't realize the extensive long history and how many eyewitness sightings there had been at Lake Champlain. So I read the book and was really impressed, and I thought, well, it's much simpler to save up some money and move to Vermont and hunt for Champ than it is to move to Scotland and hunt for Nessie. So I decided that was my game plan. So initially, me and my friend, my late friend John, who's the friend of mine that bought the house there in Philadelphia, I own the house, we went for a road trip to Lake Champlain for 3 days. This was in November of 1992, so that was my first trip to Lake Champlain.
Right.
So we spent a couple of days there looking around, mostly up in the Champlain Islands, up around North Hero and South Hero, and up around St. Albans, the north part of the lake. I came back and spent about a year saving up $1,000. And then I just jumped on a Greyhound bus with $1,000 and some of my belongings. Went to Burlington, Vermont, got off the bus, got a cab, went and got a motel room, and hit the ground running looking for a job. I didn't know anybody.
Right.
Complete stranger. This is just got off the bus, got a motel room, and,
Yeah.
see what happens. And, there was, for a couple of weeks there, I thought I was going to have to just, throw in the towel and go back home.
Yeah.
But lucky enough, I did find a job, and I stayed there for 18 years. And in July of 1994, I had what I believe was a Champ sighting. I was watching with binoculars at a park that sits up on a bluff in Burlington called Battery Park.
Yes.
And I'm looking out about 1,000 yards out to these binoculars near where this buoy is, and I see this big hump-looking object coming rising up out of the water. And I estimated it was probably about 15 feet long. And I'll explain how I came to that size dimension in a minute. So anyway, I'm looking through the binoculars and I see this hump come up. And on top of it is a smaller hump. Of some kind. Then I see it turn to the right, and when it turns to the right, this smaller object is on the right end of the animal, and the whole conglomeration is swimming along, bobbing up and down with a rocking motion, swimming to the right. And this smaller object could be interpreted as either a head on a short neck or a flipper. I'm inclined to think that it was a flipper appendage of some kind, and that the thing was swimming on its side. But I'm not 100% sure because I saw it kind of in silhouette. So anyway, this thing swims along for a few seconds, and then it stops, and then just sinks like a rock. Now you'll hear this with a lot of sightings from Loch Ness and Lake Champlain about the thing just sinking like a rock, just disappearing under the water. That's what this thing did. So I didn't have a camera. The best I could do is later that evening I went home and I made sketches while it was still fresh in my mind. Made 2 sketches of what this thing looked like. One in the configuration that I saw it originally, and then what it looked like after it turned to the right.
Yeah, and
so
it's good that you did it sooner rather than later.
Hours after it happened, so that's the best documentation I have of the event.
And it's better that you did it sooner rather than later, because the human mind can...
exactly.
Yeah.
That's, just eyewitness testimony on its own is not completely unreliable, but there are a lot of unreliable aspects to it. After the sighting, A couple of blocks down from Battery Park is Perkins Pier boat dock.
Yep.
So a little after I had my sighting, I was at the boat docks, and I looked around for a boat about the size and the same kind of boat that I saw swimming past where the monster went past, or whatever it was.
Right.
And I figured out, based on a similar boat, that it was probably about 15 feet long.
Oh, wow.
And my impressions of color was that it was a garbage bag color, sort of a greenish black, and I've seen pictures of leatherback turtles that were a similar color, and if you take the spots off a leatherback turtle, that's very much what the skin looked like.
Right, right.
So I think in retrospect, looking back on this after all these years, I found out that whales and seals do this thing called thermoregulating, where they're either trying to gain body heat or get rid of excess body heat by sticking their flippers up in the air.
Yes, right.
To either get heat from the sun or to get rid of body heat through that flipper. So they'll swim on their side and they'll stick the flipper up in the air.
Ah, right.
So I think that what I saw was one of these animals thermoregulating with a flipper up in the air. And that probably the head and neck were under the water the whole time.
Right.
But this is just an assumption. I'm not 100% sure. Now, making the assumption that I was wrong about that and that was a head on a short neck, the shape of this thing as it was swimming to the right looks very much like what you see in the Eric Olson video from 2009, if you know the video.
Oh, yes.
Video, I'm talking about it. Okay, now, Eric Olson's video was shot at a place called Oak Ledge Park, and it's very close to where my sighting happened. There's an island that you can see out from Battery Park called Rock Dunder, a small rock island. And if you go to Oak Ledge Park, you can also see the same island from Oak Ledge Park. So what I'm trying to say is that where Olson's video was shot is very close in proximity to where my sighting actually happened out in the water, to the location of where the thing was when I saw it. What you see in the Olson video and what I saw with my own eyes very much resembled a sea turtle. So, but then on the other hand, the great majority of other sightings, the unambiguous ones, seem to be describing and filming and photographing a creature that looks like a long-necked plesiosaur.
Right. What do you make of that contrast in sighting descriptions?
Well, I don't know. I mean, in the first place, we have yet to establish, to the satisfaction of the general zoology people, that there is an animal in Lake Champlain. We have yet to do that. Assuming that there is, and it is an unknown animal, the majority of what people are describing sounds vaguely like most people's conception of what a long-necked plesiosaur is supposed to look like.
Right, right.
Well, now part of the confusion about that is that what people seem to be describing sounds like what people thought plesiosaurs were like 50 or 100 years ago. You know, they used to assume that, well, plesiosaurs swim around with their necks standing up out of the water like a swan, and because they're built like sea turtles, they were amphibious and could move around on land. Now, regardless of whether fossil plesiosaurs had the ability to crawl around on land or not, which is controversial, and most of the paleontologists now don't believe they could move on land. Whatever these things people are seeing at Lake Champlain and Loch Ness apparently are amphibious, because you have a whole series of sightings of them moving around on land. So I don't know what to make of that. You know,
I think there's a whole,
regardless of whether fossil plesiosaurs were, whatever these things are, apparently can do this.
Right, and I think there's a whole book of just terrestrial sightings from Loch Ness as well.
Yeah, my friend wrote it, Roland Watson.
Yes, yep, that's the one I'm thinking of.
mean, I can think about 5 pretty good ones from Lake Champlain.
Yeah.
And the descriptions of what people are describing is virtually identical to this big, bulky, plesiosaur-like creature seen crawling around on land at Loch Ness.
Now, is there a huge, actually, is there really a contrast at all between the eyewitness descriptions of what people are seeing at Lake Champlain and what people are seeing at Loch Ness?
Not really. At least not the ones of the modern era.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, you look at the old newspaper reports, the Champ thing didn't really kick into high gear until 1873, when you had this sighting at Dresden, New York, down the southern part of the lake, of these railroad workers. Then all of a sudden you've got an explosion of sightings.
Mm-hmm.
And these have come in fairly regular spurts all the way up to the modern age.
Right.
And long neck reports from Lake Champlain unambiguously pop up in the 1880s, which is not very long after the whole thing really kicked into high gear.
Right.
So, you know, it's hard to say, because how much of what people are reporting are they before they have a sighting or they see something, how much of it is, do they have a preconceived idea of what they're supposed to be seeing?
Yes. Right.
And is popular expectations colored in their mind what they thought they saw,
Mm-hmm.
you know? I mean, if you tell enough people that, oh, the Lake Champlain monster has a long neck and it looks like a plesiosaur, and you've got people expecting to see that, in other words, we don't know how much of that is coloring what people think they see.
Right, right.
But at the same time, you've got a real historical record of looking back through the old newspaper reports, and we got to say that some of the old newspaper reports are undoubtedly spurious and made up newspaper hoaxes to sell papers.
Yes, I can imagine.
You know, but I find it hard to believe that that's all of them, because some of them sound very credible.
Right,
you know?
Exactly.
But usually the really early reports refer to the Lake Champlain sea serpent, and a lot of the early reports vaguely talk about a giant snake-like creature.
Right. A lot of, if I remember correctly, a lot of the Native American accounts talk about horned sea serpents and things like that.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing there is, though, that you have some Indian petroglyphs that look like plesiosaurs.
Yep.
Believe it or not just from the Lake Champlain region, but you've got a carved Algonquian bowl from Lake Erie region, from around Sandusky, Ohio, of a creature carved on this bowl that looks like a plesiosaur. It's got 4 flippers, and it's got an alligator-ish looking head with teeth in it. I mean, you know, this is historic. This is from, like, I don't know, at least 100, 200, 300. I can't remember the exact date off the top of my head, but it's very old. And there are no Mesozoic marine reptile bones found in the Ohio region. The closest you're going to get is up in Manitoba, Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. But whatever this thing was they're trying to depict on this bowl looks like a plesiosaur. And then over in Nova Scotia, you've got what looks like a plesiosaur's head and neck with horns on the head.
Right.
From Nova Scotia. And then down in southern Vermont, in Brattleboro, which is probably about 60 to 80 miles from Lake Champlain, you've got a series of Western Abenaki petroglyphs. They're underwater now, but there are old photographs and paintings of them, or artwork depicting them. And on this one petroglyph, you've got what look like 2 giant snakes, and then below that, you've got this unidentified thing that looks like an elasmosaur. It's got a super long neck, and it curves part way on the neck part.
Wow.
And this small body with what appear to be 4 flippers and a tail coming down from it.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis Hall, if you know who he is, other champ researcher, interpreted that to be a Tanistropheus.
Oh yeah, that's the crazy long neck one.
If you look at the actual petroglyph, you can't see toes on these appendages.
Right.
So it could just as easily be interpreted as something looking like a super long-necked elasmosaur.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now that doesn't mean that's what's being depicted in this petroglyph, but it's certainly shaped like either a Tanistropheus or an elasmosaur. So,
right.
you know, these are historical facts. How you want to interpret them is ambiguous.
Right.
Then there's another petroglyph in Canada. You go to the west of the you go to the east to the Canadian part of Lake Champlain to a place called Freshwater, Quebec. There's a mountain called Mount Pinnacle. And on top of Mount Pinnacle, there's another controversial petroglyph that seems to show a dragon-like creature with a boat.
Oh,
now, there's
yes.
been some debate. There's been some debate. Some people think that that's not an Indian petroglyph. They think it was made by Vikings and that it's a rune. So I don't know, but I've tried to reach out to the Canadian archaeologist who found it, and I've not been able to locate him. So this is something ongoing, but I do have a couple of pictures of it, and it is in the scientific literature.
Right,
so,
right. Sort of going back to the outdated plesiosaur depictions. What do you make of that, where people are claiming to see the outdated depictions of plesiosaurs?
You know, a lot of this comes down to how credible is the case that fossil plesiosaurs couldn't raise their neck out of the water, and to what extent was their neck flexibility constricted. Now, there's a lot of debate about that among the paleontologists. Leaving that aside for a moment, though, let's say we are dealing with some kind of plesiosaur descendant that has somehow managed to survive to the modern day.
Okay.
What we know about plesiosaurs comes from fossils that are 66 million years old, for the most part. So that leaves a gap of 66 million years of a ghost lineage that we don't know what evolutionary changes could have happened.
Right, right.
Now, depending on your point of view, if you have a closed mind on what they call the prehistoric survivor paradigm, and don't have an open mind about the creatures of cryptozoology, you're completely skeptical about the whole idea, you can say, oh, that's just special pleading.
Right, right.
On the other hand, if you have an open mind, you can say, okay, this is speculative evolution of an animal that dropped out of the fossil record 66 million years ago. So what I'm saying is that given another 66 million years, it's not impossible that the modern plesiosaur could be like the old concepts.
Right.
If you follow me.
Yeah, absolutely.
We just don't know, you know. We know from the fossil record, from locations that certain plesiosaurs have been found, and the associated microfossils and fish and other animals that are found in the same deposits, that some of them were freshwater, that lived in freshwater environments all the time, that lived in large lakes. Then there's other evidence from the fossils that there were types of plesiosaurs that swam up rivers and came into freshwater and then went back out again.
Oh, wow.
For whatever reason. Maybe they came in to get rid of parasites that were on their body that wouldn't live in fresh water.
Right.
Or whatever. But anyway, looking at either case tells you that plesiosaurs were what you call euryhaline organisms. And what that means is they could survive in either freshwater or saltwater. Yeah. And how they would be able to do that is they'd have to flip their osmoregulation, which is the balance of body chemistry inside the body. saltwater animals and freshwater animals have different body chemistry, and they have different ways of dealing with it, but it all revolves around their blood chemistry in the kidneys.
Right.
Animals that can change their osmoregulation have the ability to change their blood chemistry and the way their kidneys behave in order to change that body chemistry.
Right.
And the difference between a freshwater animal and a saltwater animal is that a freshwater animal is trying to take in salt into its body chemistry, and a saltwater animal is trying to get rid of excess salt.
Right, yep.
Which is why sea turtles and saltwater crocodiles have what they call a salt gland to get rid of excess salt that's usually in front of their eyes, in between their eyes and their nostrils. But they have these things called salt glands. That's why a saltwater crocodile can go back and forth from freshwater into saltwater and back again. Bull sharks can do this.
Yes, I knew about that.
Yeah, they're about the only kind of shark that's known to do that on a regular basis.
Right.
So, yeah, so you got types of seals that can do this, the saltwater crocodile, certain kind of turtles can do it, and the bull shark. So
right.
It's obvious, due to the fact that they found fossil plesiosaurs in freshwater environments and saltwater environments, that they had this ability. In fact, somewhere buried in my scientific literature, I've got an article about the discovery of plesiosaur salt glands in front of their eyes. So, let me see. I kind of went up on a side street there. Now I need to get back to where I was at, talking about plesiosaur next.
No, it's okay.
So, there's a lot of controversy, and the reason there is you have to look at the way the vertebrae of a plesiosaur neck are built. They have they're basically the center part of the vertebrae is like a round circle. It's called the centrum. Coming off the centrum, this round piece, which looks like a hockey puck,
right,
are neural spines, which are tall spines that come off the top of the vertebrae, and then there are these what do you call them? Transverse processes.
Okay.
Which look like two ribs coming off each side of the vertebrae. So these tall neural spines constrict the range of movement as the neck is trying to raise up vertically. In other words, these neural spines on top of the vertebrae bump into each other. The higher you try to raise that neck, the more those tall neural spines bump into each other.
Right.
So that constricts the up and down, being able to move the neck up. Whereas if you're moving it from side to side or moving it down from the body, you're making those neural spines, if you're moving the neck downward, you're making those neural spines move further apart from each other. Whereas if you're trying to move it in an upright position, they're bumping into each other, if you can follow me.
Right, yep.
So it's basically a biological engineering problem.
Okay.
Now, part of the controversy about how much vertical flexure they had in the neck depends on pieces of anatomy, of soft anatomy, that may not be preserved as a fossil. Such as cartilage between the neck vertebrae. In other words, between all these neck vertebrae, you would have had what they call intervertebral cartilages.
Right.
Which would have been cartilage like you see on the end of a chicken bone. When you eat fried chicken, you see that rubbery cartilage on the end of the bone.
Yep.
That's cartilage. Okay, so apparently these vertebrae each had cartilage in between the spaces of each vertebrae. Now, they're not sure how thick those cartilages would have been, but the thicker these cartilages would have been, the more space there would have been between the vertebrae and in between those neural spines.
Okay.
So in other words, what I'm saying is that if the plesiosaurs had a lot of cartilage in between each individual vertebrae, that may have spaced out the vertebrae, and these neural spines bumping into each other may not have been as much of a problem.
Right.
So, looking at everything that's in the literature, there seems to be some indication that plesiosaurs would have been able to raise their neck up out of the water with the body sitting at the water surface. Probably could have been able to raise their neck up, say at a 45, 50, 60, maybe 70 degree angle instead of a 90 degree angle. It looks like, being able to make a 90 degree angle directly from the body would have been impossible.
Right.
But say somewhere between a 45 and a 70 degree angle, I don't see any reason why that wouldn't have been possible.
Right.
And in addition to that, they know that plesiosaurs, between the back of their head, just a little ways behind that, they had what is called a sigmoid curve. It's a curve in the neck that would have curved the head downward. And what that curve was there for was to protect the cranial nerves that ran to the skull from the neck.
Right.
So a lot of people don't seem to realize, but you had running through the middle of all these vertebrae, you had the spinal cord and blood vessels and nerves, and you've got nerves inside of all and blood vessels inside of all your bones.
Right.
Every animal does. So there were special holes in the bottom of plesiosaur vertebrae for the insertion of blood vessels. And
right.
They think, one theory going is that the reason these holes, these double holes, they call them foramina, were in the bottom of these plesiosaur vertebrae was to help get extra oxygen into the blood to protect the vertebrae from deep dives, to protect it from the bends.
Right.
Yeah, so there's evidence that plesiosaurs were deep water animals that probably did a lot of bottom feeding as well.
Okay.
Now, the reason scientists today are so skeptical about plesiosaurs being able to move on land is based primarily on the difference between the flippers of plesiosaurs and sea turtles.
Okay.
Now, sea turtles are obligate egg layers. They have to come on land to lay eggs to reproduce.
Yes, yep.
Because they have certain anatomical constraints because of the way their body's built and all these different factors that are unique to turtles, that they never were able to evolve live birth like plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs, and mosasaurs. All those animals gave live birth in the water.
Right.
But sea turtles can't. One difference, you look at the flippers of plesiosaurs and you compare them to the flippers of sea turtles, you'll see that sea turtles have a full-blown set of swimming flippers on the front and feet with digits on the back.
Right.
Whereas plesiosaurs, you look at all four of their flippers, and all four of their flippers are full-blown swimming flippers.
Right.
Okay, the reason the sea turtles retain back legs with digits is to help them push their way up onto the beach and to help dig a hole to lay their eggs in,
Yeah.
So that's the reason they have a back set that are different from the front set.
Okay.
So based on looking at the situation in plesiosaurs, there's a lot of skepticism among the paleontologists that the way the plesiosaur flipper is built, that it was too stiff and inflexible to be able to bend to help the plesiosaur get enough leverage to raise itself up off the ground.
Right.
So in other words, the specialization of the plesiosaur flipper for swimming seems to have worked against the ability to move around on land. However, there is some controversy about that. Not everyone is buying into those ideas, including me. And one reason why I'm skeptical of that is there have been some recent papers written about Plesiosaur flippers, suggesting that what you see from the bone is not the whole flipper. That there seems to be indications that there was a large, fleshy back part of the flipper that was not supported by bone, that's generally not preserved as a fossil. It would have been soft tissue. And that what you see on a Plesiosaur flipper may have only been half of what you would have seen if you just saw the whole flipper fleshed out.
Wow, so they would have had
in other words,
massive paddles then.
Yeah. So the reconstruction of some of these newer papers reproduces a flipper, believe it or not, that looks very much like what you see in those famous underwater pictures from Loch Ness.
Right.
A diamond-shaped fat flipper.
Yep.
And the idea is that the bony part that you see preserved on Plesiosaur flippers would have simply been basically the front half, and that there would have been another portion of the flipper the same size coming off the back that was made entirely of soft tissue.
Wow.
So if that is right, that not only supports the Loch Ness flipper pictures as looking like Plesiosaur flippers, but it also suggests that the Plesiosaurs would have had this floppy back end of their flipper with flesh on it.
Yes. That
might have dug into the substrate and been able to give them the ability to dig into the ground and push themselves up.
Right.
If you follow me.
Yeah.
Might have made up for that problem that a lot of assumptions are made about. And the other argument against the idea of plesiosaurs being amphibious is the fact that there seems to have been a weak connection between the hip bones and the spinal cord. And they're saying that because of the weak connection between the flippers and the hips in the back, that it may not have been able to raise up from the back.
Okay.
But we don't know how strong that tail was. It's possible that this stumpy tail with a fleshy tail fin that they have found on some of them may have been able to work like a tripod with the back flippers to raise the body up. So, these are biomechanical engineering problems that we may never solve from a set of bones.
Yes.
In other words, the only way to ever, settle the matter would be you'd have to go back in a time machine.
Right.
And observe a plesiosaur trying to crawl up on the beach. I mean, we may never know. I mean, I'm not saying they're not right, but I'm not saying they're not wrong either,
Yeah.
I'm just saying that there's enough wiggle room there to say, well, maybe we don't know, Maybe they could have moved around on land like the ones reported from Loch Ness.
Yeah.
If they're plesiosaurs did.
And going back to the additional soft tissue around the skeleton of the flippers, that sort of reminds me of the that one reconstruction of the Manzi photo with the two flippers, the tops of the flippers sticking out of the water.
Yeah.
If you know what I'm talking about.
Well, it's one of those. I didn't make that, but a friend of mine did. So.
Right.
Yeah, Sandra Manzi believed that object out to the left part of the neck that you see in the photograph that looks like, a dark shape in the water was probably a flipper. So
Right.
I've even got a quote from I knew her, actually.
Right, yep. Well, so what was it like talking with her about her photo that she took?
Well, back in 2015, Loch Ness researcher named Dick Rayner, who's been over at Loch Ness for like 50 years.
Yep, I know of him.
Got together with another cryptozoologist from the Carolinas who's dead now, Chris Orrick. And they thought they had found the probable location of the Manzi photograph.
Right.
Which is up around the bridge going between Alberg and North Hero Island, way up in the, what do you call it? Alberg Passage.
Yep.
So this is up the north end of the lake. It's before you get to Canada, but north of Burlington.
Okay.
On the Vermont side. So,
yeah.
Anyway, they put together a paper about this, and I went up there to investigate, and on the way up, I stopped by to see Sandra Manzi, and I had all this with me anyway, so I showed it to her, and I says, so what do you think? And her words were, well, he's close.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's been a lot of question about exactly, they couldn't remember exactly where they took the photograph, but she said that this place that Dick and Chris Orrick had found pretty much looked like it, so I think they were on the right track.
Okay. So
there's another place that I found out. I was somebody that lives up around St. Albans, Vermont, got in touch with Joe Zarzinski, saying that he thought he knew where the picture was taken.
Mm-hmm.
So Joe, who's largely mostly doing shipwreck investigations now, sent the email on to me. So I went to check it out, and this is up south of the other location around St. Albans Bay. And it looks like it too, because you can see this beach in the background like you see in the photographs. So
right.
those are the two most promising locations that I know for where the photograph may have actually been taken. So I'm still in the process of investigating both locations.
Okay.
So we'll see what happens. She passed away about 2 years ago.
Right. Yep.
From cancer.
Yeah.
Really, really sad situation, but I'm still investigating those places. And as you know, some people think that the object in her photograph was a piece of wood debris.
Yes. Yep.
I don't think so. And two reasons that I keep an open mind is the fact that I was able to find a photograph of a monitor lizard with its head standing up that looked almost exactly like the head in her photograph in silhouette.
Wow.
Yeah. And the other reason is I was able to find an actual plesiosaur skeleton mounted from Morocco of this long-necked plesiosaur called Zarafosaurus. And in this mounted specimen, its neck is looking over its back in the same position as you see in the Manzi photograph.
Wow.
So that says to me that, yes, plesiosaurs could probably be able to do a neck maneuver like you see in her photograph.
Right.
So those two pieces of independent evidence make me at least keep an open mind about what is seen in her photograph. And she was always insistent that it was an animal.
Right.
And I see no reason to throw that assertion in the garbage.
No, absolutely.
Now, I respect the arguments that people have made that it could be wood debris, because I myself have seen plesiosaur-shaped wood debris. In fact, I've got a photograph of one that looks like some of the photographs from Loch Ness that I took myself, and I knew it was wood debris. And everybody, anytime somebody comes in and say, well, that couldn't have been a log, I show them that, because sometimes people make mistakes.
Right, absolutely.
And you've got 7-foot lake sturgeons in the lake too, that sometimes people see and make mistakes about too. So
Yeah, going back to the fish, a number of fish in Lake Champlain were contemporary with dinosaurs and the Mesozoic era.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you've got 4 fish that live in the lake that have been around since the time of the plesiosaurs.
Right. And
that's sea lampreys.
Yep.
They go back 360 million years to the Carboniferous, the Devonian period.
Right.
So they're from the age of fishes. They're one of the few surviving types of what they call jawless or agnathan fishes that are still around. You've got the lampreys and the hagfish. That's about it.
Yeah.
And the hagfish only live in salt water. You've actually got 3 different types of lampreys in Lake Champlain, 2 of which are vegetarian, are called brook lampreys. Most people, you don't ever hear about them, but everybody knows about the supposedly invasive sea lampreys. Well, now genetic evidence has said they've been in the Lake Champlain since the time of the Champlain Sea, so they're native to Lake Champlain.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah, so they've been in there for at least 12, maybe 13,000 years, you know?
Right, yeah.
And they've adapted to fresh water. But the other living fossil fishes in Lake Champlain are the sturgeons, which go back to the Jurassic.
Yep.
And the gars and the bowfins would go back to the Cretaceous.
And they all look they're all very prehistoric looking.
Well, they are. I mean, they're absolutely living fossils, as much as the coelacanth.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the interesting part. You know about the history of the Champlain Sea, right?
Yes, little bits.
Okay, well, let me just set this up for you a little bit.
Yeah, no problem.
So there were no glaciations in North America until about, say, 2.5, 3 million years ago. Late Pliocene temperatures started dropping worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had about 2 million years of glacial activity, you know, glaciations, ice ages, and then interglacials in between the different ice ages. Now, the people who study these glaciations think that there were at least 4 or 3 of them, maybe much more. Right. But anyway, so the last glaciation was what they call, in North America, they call it the Wisconsin Glaciation, which lasted roughly 700,000 years, something like that, a long time.
Yeah.
So anyway, when these glaciations started about 3 million years ago, and these places started being invaded by ice, animals had 2 choices. They could either die, or they could try to escape beyond the margins of the glaciers into what they call Glacial Refugium.
Right.
So what this means is that as these glaciers were advancing south, these fish or other kinds of animals had to migrate beyond the boundaries of the ice as it was coming down.
Mm-hmm.
So there, during the height of the Ice Age, there are places to the south of the glaciers and to the east and west of the glaciers that weren't frozen. And they're referred to in the scientific literature as Glacial Refugium.
Right.
And that's where animals that previously lived in places like Vermont and Canada went while the Ice Age was going on.
Right.
Then later on, as the glaciers receded and melted, they re-invaded the spaces that they once lived in. And where the Champlain Sea and Lake Champlain and all these places come from is from melted glaciers. 13,500 years ago, where Lake Champlain sits now, and Montreal and Toronto, there was a huge meltwater lake in front of this receding glacier called Lake Candona, and is also referred to as Lake Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
And it also incorporated portions of what is now the Great Lakes.
Okay.
You can imagine this huge glacier, and then in front of it was all this meltwater, a giant freshwater lake.
Yes.
Okay, this was around for about 1,000 years, and during this time period, these fishes started coming back to re-invade their former territories. And at this time, the sea lampreys would have come in, and all these other types of fish would have come in, primarily from the Mississippi River Basin and the Great Lakes region, moving over that way as these waterways became connected. So anyway, this went on for like 1,000 years, and then eventually the glacier that was blocking the Gulf of St. Lawrence and this giant freshwater meltwater lake receded far enough that the freshwater flushed out, and the Gulf of St. Lawrence, through the St. Lawrence River, came in to replace it.
Okay.
When that happened, it turned to salt water and became the Champlain Sea.
Right.
And at that point, you had seals and big Atlantic sturgeon and beluga whales and even bigger types of whales coming into what is now Lake Champlain, but most of the sea was up in Quebec and Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can imagine, as big as Lake Champlain is now, if you can imagine that being only a small fjord of a much larger sea in which you could have fit all the Great Lakes inside of, that's how big the Champlain Sea was.
Wow.
And so they have found seal bones in Plattsburgh, New York, and they've also found a beluga whale in Charlotte, Vermont, on the shores of Lake Champlain, and that's where they come from. The remains of marine mammals that lived in this Champlain Sea between 10,000 and 12,500 years ago.
Right.
And the reason it's not a sea anymore is that there's a phenomenon called isostatic depression and rebound.
Okay.
Now, what that's talking about is during the Ice Age, when these giant mile-thick glaciers come down into southern Canada and the upper portion of the United States, they weighed so much they actually pushed the continental plates down lower than they would have normally been. And as this ice was melting, the rebound, in other words, the crustal plates bumping back up, didn't happen overnight.
Mm-hmm.
It was a slow process. In fact, it's still going on now, believe it or not. What you had is a situation about between 13,000 and 10,000 years ago where the crustal continental plates were still weighed down from the weight of those glaciers, but the glaciers were disappearing. So you had a time window where all this ice was melting and all this water was coming down from the melting glaciers into these low-lying areas that hadn't rebounded yet. So once it became the Champlain Sea, after a period of time, the land began to rise again around 10,000 years ago. And there was a sudden bounce up around Quebec City. And when this happened, it cut off the marine influence coming into what was the Champlain Sea. And over a period of time, the water reverted to fresh water again, and some of it receded. And what is left, remnant portions of what is left of the Champlain Sea are Lake Champlain, modern-day Lake Champlain, and the Ottawa River. And there was an intermediate form of Lake Champlain in between the Champlain Sea and the modern lake that was called Lampsilus Lake. It was just a big freshwater lake, but over time, it shrunk. As the land rose, there was less room for the water to be around, and it kind of dissipated and turned into modern-day Lake Champlain and the Ottawa River, which is up in Quebec.
Mm.
So, anyway, getting back to my main point is there is evidence that before the glaciers ever came, that there would have been gars and bowfins in this region before the Ice Age.
Oh, wow.
And the reason I say that, they have found Mesozoic fossils up in the extreme high Arctic of Canada at a place called Axel Heiberg Island.
Mm-hmm.
These are roughly 100 million years old. They have found prehistoric gar scales and bowfin scales in freshwater deposits from, like I said, about 100 million years ago.
Wow. And
in these same deposits where they find the gar and the bowfin scales, they find the teeth of freshwater plesiosaurs.
Wow.
And what this tells you is that 100 million years ago, there were freshwater plesiosaurs living in the same water with gars and bowfins.
Right,
which we know live in Lake Champlain now. So, sure, that's 100 million years ago, but it's certainly suggestive of something. You know?
I was going to say, that definitely has some interesting implications.
Yeah. And it tells you that they would have probably been in the region before the Ice Age.
Yeah.
And the only indication that you have that there might have been a pre-Ice Age large body of water in the Champlain Valley is this Miocene Phytoplankton fossil that was found in Brandon, Vermont, which is not far from the shores of Lake Champlain.
Yes.
And this would have been about 20 million years old And in the literature about it, they say it's probably a missing link of some kind between the saltwater Mesozoic types of phytoplankton and the modern day ones you find in freshwater. So the indication is that this was found in Brandon, Vermont. There's evidence of a pre-glacial Otter Creek, which is a large tributary that runs from modern day Lake Champlain to Brandon.
Right.
So what I'm saying is this little microscopic fossil phytoplankton might be an indication that there could have been some kind of marine-connected large body of water in the Champlain Valley that could have transported this little missing link phytoplankton to Brandon 20 million years ago. We just don't know, you know?
Right, yep.
So, you know, there's a lot of interesting fossils that may point to interesting possibilities, but we don't have enough data yet.
No, those are good points, definitely.
I've tried to come at this from several different angles, you know?
Yeah, yep.
Now, we haven't discussed the Bodette video. We should.
We should. We absolutely should.
Which, that's a very promising piece of evidence, but external circumstances related to where it is now
yes.
and getting access to it are very problematic, as you're well aware.
Yes,
you know?
yep. Do you want to go over a bit of the history of the Bodette film in general?
Sure. And
I feel like you'd be more, better versed than I would be.
Peter Bodette, I think he's a realtor.
Yes, I believe so.
And his father-in-law is a lawyer named Richard Afalta. They were out fishing around the mouth of the Osable River on the New York side of the lake, which is probably about 2/3 of the way up toward the top, a little south of Plattsburgh. They were fishing. This is in July of 2005.
Right.
And they saw this thing come swimming toward their boat. They saw this really odd wake. Then finally, whatever it was, it got alongside the boat, and there's a video sequence they shot where you're looking over the rail of the boat a little ways into the water, and you see what it looks like: a plesiosaur's head and neck with the head moving up and down. And then it kind of moves to the left a little bit, and you see another object come out to the right of that neck-head configuration, or what it looks like a neck and a head.
Right.
That might be a flipper of some kind, and then it kind of just goes off into the water. It's a very interesting piece of compelling video, and it certainly looks like a plesiosaur, at least superficially.
Yes, it does.
So anyway, their footage wound up being shown on ABC News, and they hired an attorney, a guy named Scott Shagan, lives in New Jersey. And so basically he's had it for like the last 15 years, and anybody that tries to buy it, he won't sell it. He's been offered a ridiculous amount of money, $10,000.
Yeah.
And he won't sell the video. And anybody that tries to get access to it, you know, to study it, he wants them to sign this draconian non-disclosure agreement that most people balk at. In fact, if you know, my late partner, William Jorgenis, was trying to do this, and then he saw the non-disclosure agreement that Shagan wanted him to sign, and just balked at it because he thought it was just ridiculous. So no aspersions against Scott Shagan, but I don't know what he's up to. He won't let people get access to it to study it.
Yes.
He won't sell it. So obviously money is not the object here.
Yeah.
I don't know what this guy's game is. You know, I don't know what. So.
Yep.
We would be studying it if we could get access to it. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's all I can say.
The weirdest
thing. But the portion that you see on the ABC News is very intriguing.
Yes.
And because of the fact that you can't get access to the video the way you'd like to, a lot of people have said, well, that obviously they're trying to hide something, it's a hoax. But there's really no evidence that it is a hoax.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what can you say? I mean, it's a mess. There's only so much you can say about it. I mean, one interesting aspect that has come out from my communications with several people is that what you see in the video that looks like a head and the neck, Bodette, Shagan, and a Falter insist that no, that's a flipper or some kind of appendage.
Right.
Which confuses the matter even more. You think you're looking at a snake-like head and neck, but their interpreter says, no, that's an appendage, and that there's another portion that you don't see on the ABC clip, and I've heard this from 3 different people that have actually seen the video,
yep,
where you do see the actual head come up out of the water, and it supposedly resembles a seal's head. So this is all very confusing, and without seeing it with my own eyes, I can't really comment on it. You know?
No, exactly.
But I will tell you this, that as far as tangible evidence of there being a creature in Lake Champlain, the 3 best pieces of evidence that I can point to are the Mancy photograph, the Bodette video, and Eric Olson's video. I mean, as problematic as their, opinions are on all 3 of those, that's as good as it gets, at least at Lake Champlain.
Right. And going on to other bits of evidence, what can you tell me about audio recordings that have been recorded within Lake Champlain?
There's a bioacoustician from Charlotte, Vermont. She was based around Charlotte, North Carolina, named Elizabeth von Muggenthaler.
Yep.
She had her outfit called the Phonic Communications Research Institute. Back in 2003, she was hired by the Discovery Channel to do bioacoustic studies of what might be in Lake Champlain for a TV special about the Lake Champlain monster.
Mm-hmm.
They recorded sounds in the lake that, based on the sonogram readouts that they got with the equipment they were using, that they said had the acoustic structure and sound of whale echolocation, which shouldn't be in the lake.
Right.
It resembles the sounds made by beluga whales and dolphins and killer whales of high-frequency echolocation. So that's never been completely verified, yet it's never been completely debunked either.
Yes.
So it's kind of still up in the air.
Right.
But anyway, about 2008, 2009, I got actively involved with working with her in that aspect of it. In 2010, we published a scientific abstract about the sounds in the Acoustical Society of America.
Mm-hmm.
There's a draft version of the full paper about it, but Dr. von Muggenthaler has not decided to try to publish it as yet, so it's still up in the air, but I'm sitting on the copies of it.
Oh, wow.
I'm the co-author of it, so until she decides what she wants to do with it, it's in limbo. That's all I can say.
Oh, man. Is there any reason why she might have backed out?
She was just not comfortable that we had enough data.
Yeah.
We had a set of recordings, the original ones from 2003.
Mm-hmm.
She got additional ones in 2005. And then after I became involved, we recorded some sounds in 2009.
Right.
So she just was not ready to publish the full thing yet. So
mm-hmm.
I'm waiting on her. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
You know?
And you're ready to publish it.
Well, I'd like to tweak it some more, but it's at the time it's not going anywhere. So
right, yep.
We'll see. If something ever happened to her to where she was dead or something,
yeah,
I would go ahead and do something with it, because then I would be the only one that would be able to do anything.
Right, yeah.
But it's primarily her research, so I don't feel comfortable. In other words, it's primarily her work, so
no, that totally makes sense.
The decision should be hers.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, 2017, and you can see this in the Small Town Monsters Champ miniseries.
Yes, yep.
Will and I went over to the mouth of the Bodette, All-Sable River where the Bodette video was filmed on purpose. And we had some kind of blob object swim underneath the boat that we got on the sonar, and I have pictures of the sonar screen of when this happened.
Yep, I've seen it.
This object about 10 to 13 feet long, roughly plesiosaur shaped, with a round body and a long neck-looking appendage coming off of it. This swam under the boat for about 2 minutes and then disappeared.
Wow.
And later that same night, I was listening with the hydrophones and managed to record some faint clicking sounds that sound like the 2003 sounds. So that's all in the documentary. So.
Yep.
And the only other really compelling thing that has happened to me personally, other than that and my sighting, is in 2016, November of 2016, the Asahi Broadcasting Network came up to do a documentary on Champ.
Yes, that was the Japanese one, right?
Yeah. And they flew me up, and they had these fishing downriggers that they had rigged up with cameras, underwater cameras and a light source, and we're going to put bait on the cameras. And they asked me, okay, well, where do you want to go? You know, what would be the best place to do this? I said, the very deepest part of the lake, over at Split Rock, there's Charlotte.
Right, yep.
It's 400 feet deep. So we went over there. And the way these video cameras worked, they were recording live under the water, and you couldn't see what was happening until you brought the video back up and looked at it later on the computer. So we went to the 400-foot depths of Lake Champlain, and you can see me go to the same place in the Monster Quest episode, because when the Monster Quest people were there, they asked me, oh, where should we go? And I said, the deepest part of the lake over at Split Rock. So we went to the same place we went with the underwater camera in the Monster Quest episode. So anyway, later that night, they were reviewing the video from the day, and there's a portion on the video where you see this appendage-like object come up and touch the bait on the hook in front of the camera. Now, the bait that was on the hook was about the size of my hand. Piece of salmon. So the appendage that you come up and see to grab and touch the bait is about twice the size of the bait.
Right.
So whatever this object's appendage, tail, whatever it was about 2 feet long. And you clearly see it on the video. It just comes up and touches the bait and then goes away.
Yes.
So it's something. I mean, it could have been a weird fish. It could have been the tail of an eel.
Right.
But then again, it could have been a flipper or a tail of Champ, Plesiosaur or something.
Yeah, whatever it is, it's definitely there. It definitely interacts with it in the video.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a CGI thing. If whatever it was really come up and touch the bait. It didn't appear to bite the bait. There's the objects you see no indications of eyes or a mouth or any of that. So it's clearly some kind of appendage of some sort. So but that's the most, the sonar thing that you see on the documentary and my sighting, those are the three most compelling pieces of evidence that I personally witnessed.
Right. So you've got all those, right? You've experienced all of those. What's your takeaway from all of that?
Well, all I can say at this point is that there are things, unexplained phenomena going on in the lake, and some of it looks like plesiosaurs. That doesn't mean that's what it is, but people are actually seeing things, unexplained objects in the lake that look like plesiosaurs. So, however you want to interpret that. Right.
Well, in that case, how likely would you say that Champ as an unknown species does exist, and why would you put stock in that possibility?
From my own personal experience, the things that I just told you about, I mean, they remain unexplained. I mean, if there's not something in the lake, I want to find out what is the truth behind these things that I've seen with my own eyes and people have experienced over the years. So, whatever it is deserving of an answer.
Oh,
if
definitely.
there's not an unknown animal in the lake, people need to shut up about it and quit promoting the idea. Now, champ means different things to different people. There are people that have lived their whole life around Lake Champlain and have never seen nothing and don't believe there's anything in there.
Right.
You've got fishing guides that take fishing charters out on the lake all the time. Most of them have never seen nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You've got scientists that studied the biology of the lake at the University of Vermont, the University of Plattsburgh, and Middlebury College that haven't seen anything. So, there's a lot of people out there on the lake every day. There's people in the winter out there ice fishing.
Right.
So the thing I would like to emphasize to people is that Lake Champlain is not Skull Island. It's not the Lost World.
Right.
But it's big enough. It's 120 miles long.
Oh, absolutely.
Which means that there's 240 miles of shoreline if you take into account both sides of the lake.
Yep.
It's 11 miles wide at its widest point, and then it's 400 feet deep, which is about half the depth of Loch Ness. Now, it's not that deep, the entire run of the lake, but there is like a 60-mile portion in the middle part of the lake that is regularly over 250 to 400 feet deep.
Right.
So there's a lot of water there. And if you had a relatively small population that was in the process of constricting and dying off from a period of, say, 12,000 years ago, there may not be that many of them in there.
Right.
There's 80 different kinds of species of fish for them to eat, in addition to species of amphibians and perhaps water birds as well to feed on. So there's certainly enough food for something to eat in there, a small population.
Uh-huh.
Probably the best example, as a concrete example I could give you to compare to the idea that there could be a population of large creatures in the lake, is the data that has been done on the studies of the indigenous lake sturgeons. There was a study published back in 1992 or 93. Based on genetic studies, they said there's a historical population of lake sturgeons in Lake Champlain of 3,000 adult individuals.
Okay.
So that's the starting point, the baseline, to tell you how many sturgeons are in Lake Champlain that are indigenous. Not ocean-going sturgeons coming into the lake, but ones that are in the lake all the time.
Right, yep.
So they said there's 3,000 adult lake sturgeons. Now, according to ecological theory, there's this thing called the 5,500 rule.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, well, so what it says is that in the long run, for a population to survive genetically, you need 500 individuals, and in the short term, you need 50. So, in other words, for there to be a healthy population of champ animals, you would need to start with a population of 500. Now, 6 times 500 is 3,000,
yep,
which is the amount of adult lake sturgeons that they say are in Lake Champlain. People hardly ever see them and hardly ever catch them. In fact, they're so rare on the New York side, the New York biologists have a hotline for you to call if you see a sturgeon. That's how rarely they're seen on the New York side. So, if you had a much smaller population than the 3,000 of champs, and they're seen more rarer than the sturgeons are, a death would probably be much rarer, because every maybe 50 years they find a really big dead lake sturgeon, say about 6-7 feet long.
Yeah.
I have documented, 4 or 5 cases, but they're extremely rare. The most recent case was 2016 up at North Hero Island.
Uh-huh.
They found a almost 7-foot long dead sturgeon. So.
Oh, wow.
So, what I'm saying is I'm using the data from the sturgeons as an example to compare about the hypothetical idea that there could be something else in there. And
yes,
based on the sturgeon data, it looks like it could be possible.
No,
at least in theory.
Yeah.
No,
absolutely. I don't really have an argument for that.
based on this idea that, well, if they're real animals, they must die and leave remains somewhere. Two ways I'm trying to come at that problem.
Yep.
One, I've got biopsy darts on the end of a pole, but if I can ever get close enough to a live one, I could get a tissue sample.
Right, yeah.
And the other tack is looking for remains of ones that are already dead. So what I've been doing is I've been trying to find places, caves that would have been underwater during the time of the Champlain Sea when the water level was higher. I found 3, and I've been trying to poke around in them, dig around in the bottom and see if I can find bones of dead ones that might have died during the time of the Champlain Sea.
Right, yep.
As fossils or whatever. I mean, if you could find the remains of a plesiosaur from the Champlain Sea period that died in Champlain Sea, that would at least tell you they were there 10,000 years ago, you know?
Yeah.
And another intriguing thing that happened about 2 years ago, there's a brackish water lake in Nova Scotia. They found a dead leatherback turtle in it.
Really? Wow.
Which is highly unusual. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say.
So it swam into this brackish water lake and died. And that's the first occurrence of that happening.
I was going to say, are there any theories why the turtle might have done that?
Maybe it got lost.
Yeah.
And just couldn't find its way back out and froze to death or something. You know, they're partially warm-blooded.
Right, yeah.
But they have a low reptilian metabolism, and I think, you know, if Champ is a reptile or some kind of plesiosaurus creature, I think it probably has a similar metabolism.
Right.
But getting back to the idea of the Champlain Sea, they believe that there are animals that would have been living in the Champlain Sea for which they haven't found fossil remains of yet. And this would include cold-blooded vertebrates, things like leatherback turtles, Greenland sharks, big Atlantic sturgeons.
Wow.
They should have all been living in there, and they haven't found the remains of them. And another animal that is conspicuously absent as a fossil in Champlain Sea fossils is the gray seal.
Yes.
You know, the kind of seals that are living up in Cape Cod and are attracting all the great whites?
Yep.
That's the same type of seal I'm talking about. They found walrus and 4 other kinds of seal bones in Champlain Sea deposits, but they've never found a gray seal. And nobody knows why. So what I'm saying is that there should have been a lot of things living in the Champlain Sea that they haven't found the fossils of yet. So just because we haven't found anything unusual in Champlain Sea deposits doesn't mean that it wasn't there.
Yeah, and even that same logic can be applied to the Sasquatch phenomenon, other things like that, because for the existence of chimpanzees, the fossil record of chimpanzees, we only have about 4 teeth to show for it in total.
What do you got for Gigantopithecus? You got a couple of jaw fragments and some teeth.
Yeah, exactly.
No postcranial remains, that's it.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that seems to be relevant to this whole direction I'm talking about that we haven't discussed yet, there's a phenomenon in geology where they find bones of animals that are supposed to be extinct in later deposits.
Okay.
And how they usually explain them in the scientific literature is they say, well, these are reworked fossils. In other words, they accidentally got knocked out of their original deposits through various physical means and worked into younger fossil deposits.
Right.
So they have found plesiosaur and mosasaur material in fossil deposits way up in the age of mammals, some as young as the Ice Age. And they, like I said, they refer to them as being reworked. And the ones in the Ice Age, their explanation is that as these glaciers were coming through, they were grinding through the old fossil deposits and ground through old Mesozoic seabed deposits and ground up and brought up these plesiosaur teeth and plesiosaur backbones and all that stuff. You know? So anyway, that's how the general geology community regards the origin of these fossils. But due to the fact that you've got all these modern day reports of creatures that sound like plesiosaurs and mosasaurs, I think it might be a smart idea, but would probably a very popular one among the standard paleontologists, to go back and re-examine some of this stuff. In other words, what I'm suggesting is that these fragments, rather than being reworked, may actually be a fragmentary missing fossil record to suggest that these animals aren't extinct.
Right, totally.
So, there's a possible answer. I mean, usually what you get is that, well, Loch Ness has only been around for 10,000 years, and the last plesiosaur went extinct 66 million years ago, and there's no remains of them after 66 million years ago.
Yes.
And what I'm saying is that, there is. There's just fragments, and the geologists have said, well, it must be reworked because plesiosaurs have been extinct for 66 million years.
Right.
Do you see the circular argument there?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I've upset many paleontologists by pointing this out before, so. But it is the truth.
Right, and I think in one of I was listening to you and Andy McGrath of Beasts of Britain talking a couple months ago, I think. And you guys
talked about that on there.
Yeah, I think you talked about not so much the paleontologists, but like the higher ups frowning upon it. If like anyone's talking about that, the possibility of Loch Ness, the higher ups are like, no, don't talk about that.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a famous case of Dennis Tucker, who was a ichthyologist at the British Museum of Natural History, was fired from his position at the museum over the Loch Ness monster.
Right.
Because he claimed to have seen it in 1959 and thought it was a plesiosaur and was going around telling people.
Right.
Giving lectures about it, and finally the museum said, you stop this or we're going to fire you, and they fired him.
Jeez.
Yeah, so,
yeah.
These things happen.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time in the mid-'70s that Carl Sagan was very open to the idea of the Loch Ness monster.
Right.
And made several positive public statements, and then over the next 20 years, I guess, I don't know what happened. He may have got scared, or he may have been pressured by his peers or whatever, and he became much more negative toward it.
Right.
But, so I don't know what's going on. You'd have to be a fly on the wall and know the inside story to know what really happened there,
Right. And today, more contemporary example, I guess, would be Jane Goodall and David Attenborough both talking about the existence of the Bigfoot and Yeti being a possibility.
Yeah.
And being
well, I don't know if you've read
for it.
I don't know if you've read Gareth Williams' book about Nessie, but Attenborough weighed in on the flipper pictures back in the 70s.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and Gareth Williams' book talks about that, about how Attenborough was debating whether the flipper picture looked like a plesiosaur flipper or not. So
oh, wow.
he was involved in that way back. That would have been 1972, 73.
Right, yep. Well, I guess sort of segueing into my last few questions. How would you personally improve the field of cryptozoology and the hunt for unknown species?
Well, I used to belong to an outfit called the International Society of Cryptozoology. They're defunct now. They've been gone for about 15 years now.
Yeah,
but
yep.
They were formed in 1982 by a group of scientists, and their advisory board was made up of reputable scientists and biologists to study the field of cryptozoology and not take either a positive or a negative stance, but a neutral stance, but to give cryptozoology a refereed, scientifically valid forum to discuss the evidence. And what did them in was not the quality of the work they were doing. What did them in was financial problems.
Right.
And the president of the society was Bernard Heuvelmans, and the vice president was Roy Mackle.
Right.
So, and the secretary was a British cryptozoologist named J. Richard Greenwell, who I knew personally.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, they had noble goals, and it was a very scientifically valid journal, and with the normal referee process, and they went belly up, and since that has collapsed, cryptozoology has just been kind of drifting rudderless on the ocean with no designated leaders. I mean, there are people that I look to, like Jeff Meldrum in the Sasquatch world.
Yep.
He's basically building on what Grover Krantz did.
Yes. Yep.
You know, there were people like John Bindernagel, and we recently lost, what was it, Dmitry Bayanov?
Yes. Yes, I believe so.
So yeah, you know, you've got some academics out there that are willing to take ridicule from their colleagues to seriously study this stuff, but there are a handful of them. We need more people like that are scientifically oriented and try to stick to the scientific literature, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. I totally agree with that.
The closer we can move all this to science, the better off we're going to be, you know? And rather than waiting for the skeptics to come along and shoot holes in our data, we should be the ones shooting the holes in the data and doing the work ourselves. There's so many people, you know, I mean, anybody can call themselves a cryptozoologist at will. You don't have, there's not a degree you can get in cryptozoology. Just like anybody can call themselves a ghost hunter. They're not a parapsychologist. They're somebody out with a electrometer looking for evidence of ghosts, walking around a cemetery. That's what they are.
Yep.
I don't have a formal degree. I'm just a guy. But I have done a lot of research. I've been going out on the lake for a quarter of a century.
Right, and you use
I know how to read the scientific literature, and people that are scientists respect a lot of the things I say because they realize I know what I'm talking about. And I'm not trying to brag there. I'm just saying I've learned a lot over the years and can coherently speak about this stuff, you know?
Absolutely.
So that means something. You know, we need more people like that, you know?
Yes, I agree. No, that was very well put.
And yeah, I mean, there's some of the entities that are popular right now in cryptozoology are very highly unlikely and very incredible. I'm not going to name any specifics, but some of the skeptics and mainstream biologists that might be sympathetic to the more credible cryptids look at some of these more outlandish ones and just want to run screaming from the room. They don't have anything to do with it.
Yes.
And all of cryptozoology, to somebody that is not aware of all these subtleties, is all lumped together in one barrel.
Yep.
You know? So.
No, absolutely. Do you have any upcoming projects or any expeditions or anything coming up that you'd like to talk about?
Well, let's see. Are you familiar with the story of the Pensacola sea monster attack from 1962? I'm supposed to be interviewed about that for a television program in about 2 weeks.
Oh, cool.
For a show that's going to be on the Fox channel. And then in August, I'm going to Lake Champlain for a month.
Interesting. Yeah, because you go up yearly, right?
Yeah. And supposedly Alexander Petakov's going to maybe up there for part of it.
Oh, cool. He's a great guy.
Yep. I've known Alex for a while now.
No, those are.
I just invested in a $400 sonar unit, so I'm hoping to get out there with that. We'll see what happens. You never know, you know.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be some complications flying with this COVID-19 thing going on. I'm probably going to have to wear a mask on the airplane. And as if it ain't already enough of a pain in the butt. Now I got to put a mask on too, you know?
Yep.
But I'll do what I have to do, you know? But I'm supposed to be over there for a month, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, no, hopefully it all goes well. Hopefully this stuff clears up.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess my final question, and this is just a general question, is there a piece of advice, a life lesson that you'd like to tell everyone?
Well, just, you know, the evidence, when you go out there doing field research, the evidence that you're looking for that might impress you that there's something there may not come along overnight. I think every cryptozoologist has had the experience of being initially enthused about the field and going and talking to eyewitness evidence talking to eyewitnesses and being impressed by the eyewitness evidence. You go talk to somebody and they tell you the story, and it's so convincing, and you say, well, it must be true. Then you go out and you start looking for this thing, and you spend days, months, years looking for this thing, and you're like, man, I've been sitting here for 5 years and I ain't seen nothing.
Right.
And then you start getting doubts, you start being plagued by doubts. Well, what I'm telling you is after a quarter of a century of doing this thing, the good evidence may not come along overnight. The best results I've had happened in 2016 and 2017.
Right.
Which is less than 5 years ago. So don't give up, But
No,
at the
very
same
well put.
time, don't be so desperate to find evidence that you fool yourself into thinking you found something.
Yes.
You got to watch out for that trap too.
Yeah,
That's,
absolutely.
Sit there all day long, and then there's a freak wave comes along, and you're so desperate to find something, you think, oh, well, that was it.
Yeah.
You got to watch out for that trap too. There's all kinds of red herrings, atmospheric refraction mirages,
Yep, definitely.
wave patterns, and all kinds of things. Seiches,
Yep.
which can make freak waves without a boat on the surface.
Yes, yep.
So there's all kinds of things you got to watch out for.
right,
And
well.
I'm sure you can take these same arguments and apply them to going out in the woods looking for Bigfoot.
Yes, you totally could.
Yeah. So.
All right. Well, this was an honor.
I thought we managed to get in a lot of interesting stuff.
Yeah, totally.
You
I tried to come up with things that you might not have talked about as often.
Yeah.
So I apologize if some of the stuff seemed kind of redundant.
No, that's fine. To really thoroughly go over all of it, you'd have to have like a 10-hour mini-series audiobook or something,
Right. Yeah.
There's always something you never get to,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, before we wrap up, is there anything that you'd like to plug? Any of your online groups or anything?
Well, I have the Zombie Plesiosaur Society on Facebook. I have Lake Champlain Monster Research by Scott Mardis, William Dragunis, also another Facebook group. I have a book on Amazon, an ebook called Night of the Living Dead Plesiosaurs.
Yep.
And so there you go. I have a GoFundMe where people to donate to my research. Go to GoFundMe and punch up the Lake Champlain Monster Hunt. Should take you right to it. So.
All right. Well, this has definitely been an honor. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
I appreciate it. I'm glad you asked me interesting questions, and I got to talk about aspects of this stuff that I don't normally get to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Scott.
Well, you have a good night, and thank you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.